Hello, I'm Denver Henderson, Assistant Director of the Williams County Public Library with another episode of Oddly Peculiar. The following item appeared on page 4 of the Bryan Democrat on Thursday, May 18th, 1899. Last Thursday afternoon, 3 well-dressed and rather genteel-looking men appeared upon the streets. They were strangers. Where they came from and the nature of their business here they did not immediately make known, and very few citizens suspected. Of course, they fell under the vigilant eyes of Marshall Heidley, who suspected they were crooks, and as usual with him, he kept tabs on them during the afternoon and evening. The strangers stopped at Kramer's restaurant overnight and were on the streets early the next morning. So was Marshall Heidley. Watch was kept on their movements until sometime before noon, when all 3 went to the racetrack near the Lakeshore Station, where they remained until afternoon. When they left there to come downtown, Marshall Heidley was notified by telephone. Between 1 and 2 o'clock, they were seen to enter W.H. Riley's harness store. Business had detained Mr. Riley until a late dinner hour, and he was not at the store when the strangers went in. 2 of them went to the workroom at the rear end of the building and engaged the attention of Frank Repp, while the 3rd man tapped the safe, which stood 8 or 10 feet from the front door. The thief drew out the small money drawer, put it under his coat, and walked out. The theft accomplished, the 2 others quickly went out and joined their pal. They turned east on Butler Street, threw the drawer into the first alley, and went on east. Where they struck the lakeshore, the survivors have not divulged. When Mr. Riley returned to the store, he discovered the loss, and upon inquiry was told about the men who had been there during his absence. Marshall Heidley was quickly found as usual, told of the robbery, and taking Night Officer Morrison with him, started in pursuit. East of town, a boy told them that he had seen 3 men running across the fields toward the Lakeshore Road. Heidley and Morrison crossed the track and drove rapidly east. Meanwhile, Deputy Sheriff Wyrick and young Six started in another buggy, and Frank Repp, Mr. Slack, and others wheeled away on bicycles. Telephone and telegraph messages were sent to all surrounding stations. Heidley and Morrison drove rapidly east near Jackson's Corners, 4 miles from town, where they saw the fugitive speeding east. Throwing off his uniform coat, Heidley jumped from the buggy, over the fence, and ran diagonally across the field to the track. Morrison tied the horse and joined the pursuit. Seeing themselves hotly pursued, the thieves began to run. 2 of them spread out to the opposite sides of the track, and the 3rd one forged ahead, doubtless planning that Heidley would pass the rear runners and attempt to run down the leader when they could close in on him and do him up. As Heidley neared them, he commanded them to halt, which seemed to quicken their speed. Twice more he commanded halt, and then drawing his gun, and while running at full speed, fired. The leader dropped to the ground, and the others stopped instantly. Heidley thought the man who went down was shamming, as he had not fired with thought of hitting him. The bullet, untrue to its purpose, struck the fellow just above the ear and passed through the head, killing him instantly. A moment later, Deputy Sheriff Wyrick and young Six arrived upon the scene, and a moment or 2 later, Sheriff Wyrick and Squire Meek came up from Stryker. The 2 prisoners were handcuffed, brought to town, and jailed. A little later, the body was brought up on a handcar and taken to Dillman's morgue, where the blood was washed off and the body prepared for burial, should anybody claim it, otherwise by the authorities. Friday afternoon and Saturday all day, hundreds of people of all ages, sexes, and conditions visited the morgue to see the dead body. The 2 prisoners in jail refused to be interviewed or to give their names. They professed to have but little acquaintance with the dead man, though one of them said he was a Toledoan, and that his name was Percy Burrell, which was not far from the truth. A gentleman came up from Toledo Sunday morning and identified the body, but declined to tell the hungry hundreds a word of information. He bore a letter of introduction from Chief of Police Wrights and was given charge of the body. He bought a neat coffin, paid all expenses, and took the remains to Toledo on the Sunday afternoon train. Subsequently, it was learned that the dead man's name was Bert Burwell, that his mother, wife, and daughter reside in Toledo, and that Burwell was an all-round crook whose business had kept him away from Toledo for nearly 2 years. Never in the history of Bryan was there a more audacious robbery. In broad daylight, on a public thoroughfare, directly opposite the Chrisman, only a stone's throw from the post office, with business houses on either side of Riley's place and people constantly passing the sidewalk, it stands as the acme of boldness. Never in the history of Bryan was there more prompt and efficient action by our officers. Within 4 hours after the perpetration of the robbery, 2 of the robbers were behind bars, and the third one was on a cooling board. The killing of the man was unfortunate so far as relates to Marshall Heidley. That he did not intend to wound, much less fatally hit the fugitive from justice, is fully believed by every man whose opinion is worth a farthing, and all fair-minded men, happily they are in big majority in this town, fully exonerate him. A special grand jury impaneled Monday afternoon investigated the affair and, as the prisoners refused to divulge their names, found true bills against John Doe and Richard Rowe for grand larceny. Their trials will doubtlessly come off during the present term of court. There ends the article detailing the thrilling true crime escapades that transpired on the streets of Bryan 127 years ago. It is a tale that is exciting, intriguing, and oddly peculiar.